This is only a test, a story written and read by Alice England Burns. Sometimes, just before blaring warnings of doom, the voice on the TV proclaims, "This is only a test." And the voice goes on to say that such a test is required by the law and must be repeated on some regular basis. And after this bleeping interruption of your favorite soap opera, do you think they take up where they bleeping left off? They do not. Only a test? Only a test? Well, geez Louise, what in life isn't a bleeping test? Your first words, your first steps, your first day in first grade, your first time to mouth off to an adult. Some of those tests I don't remember, but I distinctly remember the first time I was given what turned out to be an IQ test in elementary school. I was in about fourth grade. Some days after my class took that test, and we had no bleeping idea that we had taken an IQ test or what an IQ test even was, our teacher sat down with each of us and went over the results of those tests. Her message to me was classic good news, bad news. You, she stated emphatically, should be doing a lot better in your classwork if this test grade is accurate. She refused to discuss it further, saying she did not want her students to be overly encouraged or discouraged on account of their scores on this test, and furthermore, it was not a competition but just a tool to help her students. In other words, it was only a test. Proof of the reality of that was the fact that the teacher did not change one bleeping thing about the way she supposedly helped us. Well, I could go on and on here, and that's just childhood. Once you achieve adulthood, the requisite passing of about 3 tests a bleeping day begins to loom before you. One big test was my college entrance examination. I was on the verge of a bleeping major come apart as I approached the proctor to show him my ID. A kindly man, he noticed my distress and gave me what I'm sure was his standard line of reassurance. "You cannot fail this test," he said. "In fact, this is the most helpful test you will ever take. When you have completed this test, you will be exactly where you belong." Bleeping remedial math was where I belonged. And it was another good news, bad news thing, as I also got placed in a most wondrous advanced English class, English literature to be exact. Besides, remedial math was fun and easy. I was a so-called non-traditional student, meaning that I was really, really bleeping old. A veteran of old hat regular math, and I had never heard of sets and subsets. I needing nothing but the bleeping definitions of the concepts before I was off and running. Another thing I had done later in life than most people was learn to drive. And once I thought I was ready, I faced that bleeping driving test with none of the confidence my swaggering 16-year-old friends had demonstrated way back in my high school days. They would pull up to school one day driving their parents' car with one of the frightened-looking parents sitting beside them, and within the week would be proudly displaying their bleeping license. Age and semi-wisdom tells me the confidence they displayed might have been bogus, but when I took my own driving test, I didn't know how to fake confidence. I was 25 years old. I failed twice, as I had 2 little boys by then, and my mother-in-law had been looking forward to not having to drive us to the bleeping pediatrician and so forth. I had to confess my failures. "Listen," she said firmly, "tell them who you are." "I don't understand," I admitted. "Who am I?" You, she said, stretching forth her arms the way I imagine Moses did after he plopped down the bleeping stone tablets before the idol-worshipping chosen people, are the granddaughter of Dr. James Benton Vines. Well, I did as instructed, and wonder of wonders, it bleeping worked. Driving test number 3 was a charm, even if a charm fueled by graft and corruption. I have been a licensed driver ever since, and never once have I had to parallel park, proving that the requirement for that was only a bleeping test. Back to my misspent youth. After spending a few years pretending I was bleeping Della Reese in a secretarial position in Perry Mason's law practice, or the closest thing to it that could be found in bleeping Birmingham, Alabama, I went to work for the federal government, a fertile field for any and all bleeping tests you could ever want to have. And I mean real bona fide tests where you have to choose one letter to answer or fill in a blank. My scores on these tests led eventually to my being placed in what the bleeping government likes to think of as management. Soon after I was placed in that management position, and you must understand management and the bleeping government then had little meaning beyond the fact that you did not get overtime simply for not being able to do your job within your 8-hour day. I was sent to a course in Washington, D.C. called Management in Diversity. In this class, I, along with a lot of other bleeping newbies, was taught such things as this. Your Hispanic employees might think they should have a siesta after lunch. Your Asian employees might become resentful if you and their fellow employees critique their ideas, even in a brainstorming session, the purpose of which is to discuss and critique each other's ideas. Your Native Americans are inscrutable, whatever that means, and they must therefore not be held to a strict dress code. You may correct the grammar and syntax of any and all ethnic groups except for African Americans. They talk like that on purpose. I passed the bleeping final test for this course by adhering carefully to the advice of a black friend who said he had become a bleeping expert at being pulled over while black, a test similar to the final exam given the diversity group only insofar as it required rote recitations of specific information, true or not. However cowardly it was to pass this shameful bleeping test with flying colors, I redeemed myself, at least in my own mind, by mouthing off in the bleeping inevitable critique that followed. At the risk of living up to my reputation in that unworthy manner, I desperately wanted to say that people should be treated as individuals and not as a particle from a lump of humanity that happened to be born into a certain race or culture. And so I did say exactly that in so many bleeping words. In the end, it was only a bleeping test anyway, but my 30-year career in management jobs presented a lot of real-life tests that could not be described or written off as only, and from which I learned more from my bleeping failures than from my successes. This is the bleeping end, with apologies to Andy Rooney, late of 60 Minutes, whose bemused outrage I hope to mimic in writing this story. May he rest in peace and fret no more. On second thought, how will we know him when we greet him in heaven if he's not fretting?